So for this video, we're going to be looking briefly at Chapter 3 in the Scott text. We're going to be talking about that in relation to organizational theory and also the ways that it can help you develop a theoretical framework based on organizational theory. So I'm limited on the text, on the topics I'm covering in here. I'm really trying to pick stuff that might help you build a pertinent framework that you can use. So the rest could be beneficial to you, but possibly only on an individual basis. So what is an institution? Institutions have cultural cognitive elements, regulative normative elements, and those interact with activities and resources to provide social life and stability. There are multiple social structures, there are rituals, social activities, elements, and different resources that are available to those in institutions. So most of the time, institutions are relatively resistant to change. They're transmitted across generations, they're maintained and reproduced. This goes back to the culture discussion that we have. Change comes long-term within the organization, depending on who the actors are and who the stakeholders are. So if you were looking at doing a case study on a longitudinal perspective of a building, leader, or school system, you might be able to use institutional theory. If you had a principal that had been in a building for an extended period of time and saw culture and institutionalism change, if you have a superintendent who's been there for a long time, it would be tougher to study that than principal institutionalism, but you could certainly look at that and you could certainly use it. What are the pillars to institutions? I'm going to look at the different pillars, but I'm going to refer you to a table that's on page 60. The regulative, normative, and cultural cognitive. We'll go over each one of these. So in a regulative pillar, we look at, are the actors in the institution bound to obey certain behavior? Are there external parties that are forcing them to do that? Precision is, do the rules actually mean what the conduct should be? And delegation is, can other people interfere with the rules, and do they have the authority to apply the rules and resolve disputes when necessary? So this works in a hierarchical manner in schools between teachers, students, principals, and central administration. You have to think about the external parties as well, because the external parties are the ones that are coming from each different dimension, and they're the ones that are giving different perspectives. You're looking at the federal government, the state government, you could even argue some community leaders as well, or businesses. So precision, sometimes rules are explicit, sometimes they're not. Some people have indicated they want to look at mentoring. If you're interested in looking at mentoring, perhaps looking at precision as an organizational theory might be something that could help, because you'd be looking at rules and norms that mentors and mentees can and should follow in their positions. So delegation in schools. What third parties apply the rules in your schools? I say it's the local school board, state board, and federal regulations. This is more of a policy thing than it is an organizational thing, but it might be something that could help you in that realm. In terms of regulative institutions, give you some different ideas on that. If you're looking at compliance, you're looking at compliance versus expedience. If you're looking at mechanisms, you're going to say, are they coercive mechanisms, or do individuals have freedom? Is there instrumentality in logic? Can people have choice and make their own decisions? Are there sanctions, rules, or laws? Laws and sanctions are certainly a lot more difficult to break than rules, and you get in more punishment for them. What is the affect, not effect, it has? Could that be fear, guilt, or innocence, or even happiness? And is it legitimately and legally sanctioned as well? So the normative pillar really says that things should be done to pursue what happens in value. Goals and objectives should be designed, but there should be appropriate ways to pursue them within all organizations. So there are some rules that could be specific to your building or your school system. So if those are rules that have made successes in your school, this could be something that creates worth in studying institutionalism. If it sets your district apart from others and makes it special, you do have the normative pillar in schools, and that could be something that could make your district special. So when we talk about that, we talk about social obligation tends to take impact in a normative institution. The expectations are normally binding because they follow a norm. It's going to be normative mechanisms. This is the way we've always done things. When you decide whether or not to do something, it's whether or not it's appropriate for the organization. Indicators are based on accreditation, highly qualified. For the affect, it's either shame or honor more than anything else. We're going to make sure somebody gets praised or they get put down. And these are normally morally governed as well. So cultural cognitive pillar, it's basically saying, you know, whether or not culture is pre-established or whether or not a new stakeholder comes in and tries to create their own culture. When I spoke about succession planning earlier in the course, I would argue that succession planning could be related to cultural institutions. So assessing culture really can come holistically. You can't make a judgment on culture without asking a combination of all stakeholders. You have to include community, businesses, and all staff and stakeholders in those discussions if you're really saying that you're involving everybody in the cognitive culture domain in schools. So what does that look like? Compliance is shared understanding or things are taken for granted. Basis of order should be, you know, this is the way that we do things, this is what our culture says. So it's kind of like having your own constitution. You're going to be looking at mimetic mechanisms, meaning things will spread, maybe not on paper, but they'll spread through different interactions others has. Logic is going to come from the culture's logic, which makes it orthodoxy more than anything else. Indicators are going to be based on shared logic, common beliefs. The affect is there's either full certainty or confusion. Confusion if you're not doing what the culture encourages you to do. It's culturally supportive, recognizable, and comprehensible, and that makes it a legitimate way to look at organizations. So for constitutive rules with truth in reality, this really says you look for truth in things. But you would look at observations first, assumptions, and then correlations. It's difficult to measure rational truth in organizations, especially ones that you work in, because there can be biases that are involved. Can you feasibly do this as a study? Yeah, you could, but I also think this is a longitudinal study. For me, this sounds ethnographic to me in its basis. So that's clearly the most difficult pillar to measure, but if you're looking at cultural institutionalism, there are different frameworks that you could possibly be using. So I'm going to be going on to the last chapter in Scott, but I wanted you to think about this in terms of potential frameworks that you could use if you're thinking of schools and organizations institutionally. Thank you.